Imagine this. You're sitting across from a child just 9 years old. He barely speaks, avoids eye contact, and doesn't really connect with the world around him. But then he picks up a paintbrush, and what he creates sends a chill straight down your spine. It's not just a child's drawing. It's a detailed painting of a house. Not his own. Not one he's ever been to. And yet, the layout is precise. The windows, the furniture, even the wallpaper, all of it rendered like he's been there before. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. He paints the same house. Over. And over. Again.
And again.
That's exactly what happened to a social worker in Oregon when a boy in foster care began painting a house that no one recognized. But when she took a closer look, zoomed into one specific detail, the entire story changed. She realized this wasn't just a random sketch. It was a clue, a message, and maybe even a cry for help. Now, if you're watching this and feeling that goosebump crawl up your neck, trust that you're not alone. You're here because something in this title pulled you in, because a part of you, maybe the part that believes in deeper meanings and hidden truths, needed to know why a little boy kept painting a house he should know existed. And I promise you this right now, by the end of this video, you'll get that answer. Every brushstroke has a reason. Every strange detail has a connection. And the ending? It's something you absolutely won't see coming. But here's the thing, this story isn't just about mystery. It's about memory, trauma, and the eerie way our minds try to tell the truth when words fail. It's about how the past finds a way to resurface, even through the hands of a child. So don't scroll.
Don't click away.
Because what you're about to see will change the way you look at children's drawings forever. You see, every one of us is drawn to mystery, especially the kind that hints at something real. Something buried. And that's exactly what this boy's artwork did. For weeks, caseworkers thought it was just therapy, something the psychologist encouraged him to do. Paint, draw, express. But what he was painting wasn't just expression. It was evidence. And the moment that truth hit, it hit hard. The child, whose name we'll keep private for his safety, had bounced from home to home, never really forming bonds with his foster families. On paper, his file looked like so many others: abuse, neglect, silence. But in his art, he was screaming. Screaming in color. And it took someone looking beyond the surface to finally hear it. The social worker who noticed? Her name is Claire. A woman who's seen everything you can imagine in the child welfare system. But she couldn't shake the feeling that these paintings weren't just therapeutic, they were specific. Too specific. And that's where the twist begins. Because Claire didn't just file it away. She dug deeper. She asked questions. And what she found linked this boy's paintings to something no one in her department expected. A house tied to a decades-old cold case. One that was never solved. One that law enforcement had all but forgotten. Until now. Let's stop for a second, take a breath. If you're still watching, it's because this story has hooked you the way it did me the first time I heard it. And that's good. That means you're already halfway into the truth. But here's where I need you to stay with me. Because the next few minutes, they're crucial. They explain why the wallpaper in the painting matters. Why the cracked window wasn't just a creative choice. And how one missing photograph found in an old storage box blew this case wide open. Trust me, if you look away now, you'll miss the moment where everything shifts. The part where fact and intuition collide. As we unravel this together, I want you to remember something. Kids don't always tell you what's wrong. But they will show you. Through their actions. Through behavior. Through art. And in this boy's case, he was showing a place. One that he may have once called home. Or one where something happened that changed everything. Either way, someone needed to look close enough to see it. And Claire did. But here's where it gets chilling. When the house was finally identified, it wasn't listed in any current databases. Not on Zillow. Not in foster records. It wasn't even on recent maps. But it existed. It just hadn't been lived in for years. And when Claire and the authorities arrived, what they found inside wasn't just furniture covered in dust. It was something no one could explain. Something that connected this boy to a truth buried long before he could speak. We're just getting started. And in the next part, I'm going to show you the exact moment Claire realized she was looking at more than a painting. It's the moment the story turns. When the room you're sitting in right now, quiet, safe, still, suddenly feels like the edge of something much darker. Something real. And something that's been waiting to be uncovered for years. Claire had been on the job for over a decade. She'd worked hundreds of cases, each one blending into the next. Names, dates, broken homes, whispered allegations. But this one felt different from the start. The boy, whom we'll call Eli for privacy, was placed into foster care after a neighbor called the police about strange noises coming from a house that didn't match its suburban calm. There were signs of neglect, maybe something worse, but no one could quite piece it together. Eli didn't speak when officers found him, just held tightly onto a crumpled piece of paper, a drawing of that same house he would go on to paint again and again. At first glance, no one thought much of it. Just a kid doodling in the middle of a traumatic episode. But then the drawings became more intricate. Windows drawn in the exact same pattern every time, a red door with a crack near the handle, a tree in the front yard that was always missing its top branches. There was something obsessive about the details, something deliberate, as if Eli wasn't just remembering, but documenting. Claire began to notice the pattern during one of their weekly sessions. The drawings never changed, only deepened. Each one had more layers, more shadows, more objects, more emotion. Eli still didn't talk, but when she asked where the house was, he simply pointed to the sky, then tapped his chest. It wasn't a game. It was code. A memory he couldn't shake. So Claire started digging. She combed through his records, talked to past foster parents, teachers, even a therapist who had noted in her files that Eli sometimes hummed a tune when painting, a tune that none of them could identify. When she recorded it and sent it to a friend in law enforcement, they ran it through a national database of 911 calls. That melody matched the background sound in a distress call from 12 years earlier, one connected to a missing persons case that had never been solved. The match was chilling, but it wasn't proof. Claire knew she needed more. So she did what most social workers don't have time or resources to do. She went off the clock. Drove to rural areas based on clues in the boys' paintings, taking screenshots from Google Earth, comparing satellite images to the layout in Eli's drawings. One day, after weeks of this, she came across a house that looked eerily familiar. It was abandoned, fenced off, and completely overgrown. She called a contact in the sheriff's office, and together they got a warrant to enter. What they found inside wasn't dramatic at first. Old furniture, water-damaged walls, signs that no one had lived there in years. But in the upstairs bedroom, the one with peeling wallpaper and a broken bed frame, was a toy, dust-covered, moldy, but unmistakably similar to one drawn in Eli's most recent painting. A toy that had never appeared in any of the house photos she'd previously seen. That was the moment Claire knew this boy hadn't imagined anything. He'd been there. As she kept digging, new questions emerged, ones that didn't have simple answers. How could a child so young remember a place with such vivid clarity if he hadn't been there recently? Why was there no trace of him or his family connected to the house in public records? And who were the people in the background of his later drawings? Figures without faces, looming in corners, always watching. Claire couldn't tell if they were real or symbolic, but Eli's expression whenever he painted them was unmistakable. Pure fear. The deeper she looked, the more the lines between fact and fiction began to blur. One former neighbor of the abandoned house claimed he remembered a woman and child living there about a decade ago, but when pressed, his story shifted. Another said the house had been empty for as long as he could remember, but local property records were missing for a 5-year window during the early 2010s, a time when no taxes were paid and no new deeds filed. The original owners had died years ago, but no one could trace who had lived there since. And then, as Claire pieced together that timeline, something darker began to take shape. A man named Peter Langley, once a handyman in the area, had been arrested around the same time the 911 call was placed, the same one with the humming in the background. He had no priors before that, just a DUI, but the charges related to that arrest were sealed. A red flag, but not a smoking gun. When Claire asked around, some locals called him harmless, others strange. He moved quietly, kept to himself, and vanished from town shortly after being released. His last known residence? less than 4 miles from the house in Eli's paintings. But no one had heard from him in years. No death certificate. No missing person report. Nothing. Just silence. At this point in her investigation, Claire started noticing something else. Something she hadn't expected. She was being watched. Her car, parked on her street, would sometimes have the passenger mirror tilted down, even though she never touched it. A man stood outside the social work center one evening, not speaking, just staring into the building. When staff approached him, he walked away before anyone could catch his face. And once, when she returned home late, she found a page from one of Eli's paintings tucked under her windshield wiper. It wasn't the full page, just a ripped corner. But it showed the red door, the one with the crack in the handle. Now the mystery was no longer just about a child's memories. It was becoming something much bigger. Someone didn't want this house found. Someone didn't want the truth unearthed. Claire had a choice: back off, hand the case over to the authorities, and move on like so many others had. Or keep going, risking her job, maybe even her safety. But she couldn't let it go. Not when a child had shown her something no one else could see. And yet there was still one thing that didn't make sense. Eli had never been listed as missing. No Amber Alert. No runaway report. No birth certificate in the national database. So where had he come from? Who had he been before the system found him? And why, in his most recent painting, had he drawn a new figure, one different from the others? This one had a face. Eyes that seemed to stare directly at whoever was looking. A scar across the cheek. A ring on one finger. Details no child should be able to remember unless they were burned into his memory for a reason. And just when Claire thought she'd seen it all, the boy finally spoke. Just one word. Quiet. Shaky. Barely a whisper. But it sent shivers down her spine. Because it wasn't a name or a place. It was something else entirely. Something that connected every piece of this disturbing puzzle. But what that word was and what it meant is something I'll reveal in just a moment. Because once you hear it, everything you've seen so far will suddenly make sense in the most unsettling way. So stay with me. We're closer than ever. And what comes next changes everything. The word Eli whispered was basement. Just that, nothing more. But it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Claire froze when she heard it. Not because it was dramatic, but because in all her visits to the abandoned house, she never saw a basement. No entrance. No stairs. Nothing. Yet Eli had painted it multiple times. A door beneath the floorboards, sometimes open, sometimes locked. Once, in a chilling version of the painting, there was a figure trapped behind it, just a faint outline of hands pressed against a slatted grate. Claire hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just another eerie detail from a traumatized mind. But now, that single word changed everything. If a basement existed and she missed it, what else had she overlooked? The next morning, she returned to the house alone. She didn't want to wait for the proper clearance. It would take weeks, maybe longer. And something in her gut told her time was running out. But when she arrived, the property was different. Not drastically, but just enough. The weeds near the front porch had been trampled. A broken window had been covered with fresh plywood. And the front door, once loose on its hinges, was now tightly shut, secured with a chain Claire was certain hadn't been there before. Someone had been here recently. Maybe the night before. And maybe they knew she was coming back. She found a way in through the side, the same route she'd used before, but the moment she stepped inside, something was off. The air was heavier, mustier, like something had been disturbed. Furniture was rearranged. A framed photo she could have sworn was upstairs was now lying face down in the downstairs hallway. But most troubling of all, the toy in the upstairs bedroom was gone. Just the dust outline remained. Claire's heart dropped. Someone had taken it. Either someone watching her or someone who knew exactly what it meant. Whatever it was, she wasn't alone in this search anymore. Back at the office, she tried to log her findings into the state system, but her access had been restricted. A pop-up message told her the case was flagged under review, and she was temporarily suspended from viewing or editing Eli's file. That's when she got the call. A man claiming to be from the Department of Child Welfare's legal division told her, politely but firmly, that she was to stop all off-duty investigation into Eli's history. That all communication regarding the case must now go through official legal channels. No explanation. No room for negotiation. It felt like a trap. Or worse, a warning. Frustrated but not ready to quit, Claire reached out to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Nathan Blake, a former investigator turned private consultant who had once worked a series of child endangerment cases with her in Seattle. Nathan had left government work after one of their shared cases ended badly. He accused the system of burying the truth to protect political interests. Claire remembered how paranoid he became toward the end, but she also remembered how often he'd been right. She sent him the paintings, the GPS coordinates, and the photos of the house. He called her back at 2:17 a.m., voice low, tight with concern. He told her the toy that was missing from the bedroom matched one found at a cold case scene involving a missing child named Leo Warner from 11 years ago. A case that had quietly gone cold despite multiple leads pointing to potential abuse. The house that child vanished from? Less than 10 miles from the one in Eli's painting. It was all beginning to link up. But just as the puzzle started forming a recognizable shape, Claire hit another wall. Eli was moved to a new facility without her knowledge. When she drove to his previous foster home, the family said a different social worker had picked him up that morning, someone Claire had never met, someone whose name didn't show up in the staff directory. That same day, Claire's work email was locked. Her phone began getting strange texts, random numbers, scrambled words, once even an audio file that played static for 7 seconds and then cut out. She took it to a technician who told her it looked like someone had accessed her cloud backups remotely. Every file related to Eli gone.
Wiped.
Desperate, she arranged a face-to-face meeting with Nathan. They agreed to meet in a coffee shop out of town, but Nathan never showed. Instead, she received an envelope, hand-delivered by a server who said it was dropped off that morning by a man wearing sunglasses and a gray cap. Inside the envelope was a single photograph, grainy and torn. It showed the abandoned house, but in front of it stood a woman holding a small child. The woman's face was scratched out, violently, as if by a knife or fingernail. But the child? The child looked exactly like Eli, only younger, and dressed in pajamas Claire had seen before, in one of his earliest paintings. She didn't know what to make of it. Was it a threat? A clue? Or something more sinister? What shook her the most was the timestamp on the back. August 13th, 2014. The same day the 911 call with the haunting melody had been placed. The same day Leo Warner had vanished. The pieces were no longer just fitting together. They were overlapping, repeating, echoing, as if something or someone had orchestrated this entire sequence, carefully, deliberately, years ago. And then, just before leaving the cafe, Claire noticed a man sitting 2 tables over. He wasn't drinking anything, just watching. When she stood up to leave, he reached down as if picking something up from under his table, but what he pulled out was a folder.
Thick.
Yellowed, with a name on the front she couldn't read. Their eyes met. He smiled slightly. Not warm, not threatening, just knowing. And then, before she could react, he stood and walked out the side door, leaving the folder behind. Claire waited until the shop cleared out before reaching for it. Inside were reports, documents, even more photos, and a list, names of children, all around Eli's age, all from nearby towns, all with one thing in common. Every one of them had painted a house. The same house. But one page was missing. The last page. Torn cleanly from the staples. And that's where the story takes a turn I wasn't ready for. Because what that missing page revealed, once Claire finally found it, is something that will not only explain Eli's past but yours. And mine. And why some stories are never meant to stay buried. Don't go anywhere. What happens next isn't just the twist, it's the truth. Claire barely slept that night. The folder haunted her. The names, the images, the way each case mirrored the last. And that missing final page, torn away like someone wanted to bury just one last thread, gnawed at her. She kept asking herself the same question. How could these children, from different towns and different years, all paint the same house? It defied logic. It defied coincidence. And yet, the drawings were nearly identical. Always that red door, always the crooked tree, always a single shadow standing in the window upstairs. She knew the answer wasn't just in what Eli remembered, it was in what had been kept from him. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase these children's connections to each other.
But why?
Who stood to gain from their silence? While Claire wrestled with these questions, she wasn't aware that someone else, someone far from her circle, was starting to uncover similar threads. In a small town 2 counties over, a high school art teacher named Melanie Garrett was organizing her spring exhibition. One of her most reclusive students, a 9th grader named Josh, submitted a last-minute painting that chilled her to the core. It was almost an exact match of the ones Claire had collected. Same decaying house, same malformed tree, same red door. The painting felt so familiar that Melanie dug through her own archives. Years ago, she taught a summer camp for foster kids. That year, a quiet little girl named Lana had drawn the same house, only her version had a number scrawled above the door. 1121. At the time, Melanie assumed it was part of a fairy tale or imaginary game, but now she wasn't so sure. She Googled 1121 Red Door House, expecting nothing, but one of the search results took her to a cached version of an old real estate listing, long since taken down. It matched the house Claire had visited. Melanie reached out to a local podcast host who covered missing persons cases in the region. The host, intrigued by the overlapping details, posted a TikTok clip with snippets of the children's paintings side by side. It went viral almost instantly, trending under tags like #MissingKidsMystery, #RedDoorHouse, and #CreepyKidArt. Within hours, viewers began submitting their own stories, photos of their children's drawings that bore eerie similarities, rumors about an old religious commune that used to own the land the house sat on, even claims that the same haunting melody heard in Eli's recordings had been captured in unrelated Ring camera footage late at night. Something was beginning to stir, something much bigger than Claire or Eli alone. And while most of it sounded like online conspiracy bait, Claire knew better than to dismiss it. But just as things began to gain traction, the folder vanished. Claire had hidden it in a locked drawer at her home office, and yet when she returned from an emergency meeting the next day, it was gone. No sign of forced entry. No prints. Nothing. In its place was a single item, a child's bracelet. Worn, plastic, and pale blue, with lettered beads that spelled out Leo. The same name Nathan had whispered to her before he disappeared. She didn't need confirmation. She already knew whose it was. But it raised a chilling implication. Someone had been inside her home, not just watching, but sending a message. A message that said, "We're ahead of you." Panicked and increasingly paranoid, Claire tried calling Nathan again, but his number was disconnected. She even drove to his last known address, only to find the apartment gutted and abandoned. A neighbor claimed Nathan had left in a hurry just 2 days prior, after a man in a dark SUV was spotted parked across the street for hours at a time. The same neighbor swore she saw Nathan arguing with someone near the mailboxes, late one night. He looked scared, she told Claire. Like he knew something was coming. Then came the letter. It arrived in Claire's mailbox the next morning with no return address. Inside was a single typed sentence on plain white paper. "Stop looking, or the next drawing will be of your house." There was no signature, no date, but it was enough. Enough to let her know that whoever was behind this wasn't just cleaning up loose ends, they were tightening the noose. Claire wanted to run. She wanted to hand over everything to the police and walk away. But she couldn't. Not anymore. Not with children still unaccounted for, with names still unspoken, with Eli, quiet, terrified Eli, still caught in the middle. And just when Claire thought she had a grip on what was happening, the entire story shifted again. She got a call from a woman named Dr. Rosalind Vega, a retired child psychologist who had once specialized in trauma-induced memory suppression. Rosalind had seen the viral video and recognized a face in one of the overlapping images, her own niece, who had disappeared 15 years ago under unexplained circumstances. But here's the twist. Her niece was found 5 years later, in another state, with no memory of her past life. She was adopted under a new name and raised by a different family. Recently, after turning 18, she began painting the same house, again and again, until one day, she painted a figure standing in the window, a woman with graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a pendant around her neck. It was Rosalind, her aunt. The girl had no idea why she remembered her, or how. This wasn't just about missing children anymore. This was about memory,
Control.
erasure. Someone, or something, was wiping identities, relocating lives, burying truths deep enough that even the victims couldn't trace them. And now, the paintings weren't just memories, they were roadmaps.
Proof.
Warnings. But who was orchestrating it?
And why?
Before Claire could even begin to piece it together, she received a text from a blocked number. No words,
Just a video file.
She opened it, hands trembling, and what she saw nearly made her drop the phone. It was security footage, grainy, black and white, from a nursery room. A crib. A rocking chair. A woman walks in, picks up a child, and turns toward the camera. Her face is hidden in shadow. But on her wrist, there's a bracelet.
Pale blue.
Beads that spell Leo. And in the background, the walls are covered in drawings. Not hung, not framed, drawn directly on the wall. One after the other. All the same house. Only this time, there's fire in every window. A burning house. A trapped child. And a shadow standing just outside. Claire couldn't breathe. Everything she thought she knew was unraveling. And the one person who might still hold the truth, the girl who came back, was now missing. Again. And here's the thing. Her last known location? Just miles from Claire's own neighborhood. Claire didn't notice the car right away. It was subtle, always a few lengths behind, never close enough to be obvious, but there was a pattern. She'd take a left through a quiet residential street, and the same black SUV with tinted windows would appear 2 turns later. She'd stop for gas, and it would park across the street, engine idling, never pulling in. For 2 days, she tried to tell herself it was coincidence, that her nerves were just fraying from everything piling up, vanishing case files, eerie artwork, veiled threats. But by the 3rd day, she stopped pretending. She was being watched. Not just casually monitored, surveilled. Hunted, maybe. And it was no longer just about Eli or the other children. Now it was personal. The realization hit hardest the moment she called her sister, who lived 2 states away, someone she hadn't spoken to in weeks. Claire just wanted to hear a familiar voice, anchor herself to something safe. But the call didn't go through. Instead, she got a robotic message saying the number was no longer in service. That didn't make sense. Her sister was always available. She checked again. Then again. Nothing. Growing more anxious, Claire called her sister's workplace and asked to speak with her. The receptionist hesitated, then said she hadn't shown up all week. No call. No notice. No contact. When Claire asked if they could check on her, she was told a welfare check had already been done. Police said the place was empty. The voice on the other end said, "No signs of a break-in, just gone." That was the breaking point. Claire dropped the phone and backed away like it had burned her. Her sister wasn't involved in any of this. She didn't even know about Eli or the house or the folder. There was no reason for anyone to touch her, unless this was about leverage. A message. You're not safe, and neither is anyone close to you. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she stared out the window, half expecting the SUV to be there again. But this time it wasn't. There was only silence, too quiet, like the world had suddenly hit pause. And that's when she saw the envelope. It was slipped halfway under her front door. Claire approached it slowly, every instinct telling her to run in the other direction. But she picked it up, flipped it over. No writing, just a thumbprint in dried red ink on the seal. Inside was a photo, a fresh one. Her, taken from outside her home. Through the blinds. Standing in her kitchen the night before, holding Eli's most recent painting, her expression blurred by the reflection on the window. Whoever took it was close, just feet away. And that wasn't the worst part. The photo was paper-clipped to a printed sentence. "Don't forget what you used to be." That phrase cracked something open inside her. It was a reference to something long buried, something Claire had never told anyone, not even Nathan. When she was 12, she spent 3 months in a group home after her mother's mental breakdown. The records were sealed, the memories locked away. But there was one thing she always remembered: a boy in the room across from hers who used to draw obsessively. Every day, the same thing: a crooked house with a red door. She had forgotten until now. Forgotten like someone wanted her to. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat up going through every document, every painting, every recorded word from Eli and the other children. She rewatched the static video file. She traced the pattern in the wall drawings frame by frame. And she started seeing something she had missed: a symbol, almost like a brand. A triangle with a circle inside, etched into the corners of several paintings. Subtle, sometimes hidden in shadows or trees, but always there. She Googled the symbol and found almost nothing, just vague conspiracy posts, a few Reddit threads connecting it to deep web lore, and one article archived from a defunct local paper about a therapy camp that had operated for foster youth in the early 2000s. It closed after a scandal involving hypnosis and memory recovery techniques, later deemed unethical. The camp's name? The Red Threshold. She dug further and found a single blurry photo of the camp's entrance arch. Her blood ran cold. The arch bore the same triangle and circle symbol, burned into wood. Below it, the camp's motto was engraved: "Through forgotten doors we heal." Claire's mind raced. Could these paintings be resurfaced memories from children who had passed through that place? Could the house itself be a construct, a shared illusion rooted in suppressed trauma? Or worse, was it real, and the therapy was meant to erase it from their minds? Was someone using children like test subjects, rewiring what they knew, what they remembered? She didn't have long to sit with the thought. Her power went out suddenly. Everything plunged into darkness. Her backup battery on the phone blinked once, then went dead. It wasn't a neighborhood outage. Her neighbor's windows still glowed with soft light. This was targeted. She reached for the drawer where she'd kept a spare burner phone, empty. She tried to grab her car keys, gone. Just then, a thump echoed from upstairs. Not a creak.
Not a pop.
A deliberate thump, like a boot on hardwood. Claire grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept up the stairs, heart hammering, trying to stay silent. She reached the top and scanned the hallway. Nothing moved, but the door to her guest room was ajar. She hadn't left it that way. She slowly pushed it open, the beam of her flashlight flickering as it swept across the room. And there, written across the wall in what looked like black crayon, was a phrase in a child's handwriting: "We're all still there." Below it, a child's drawing was taped to the wall. It was another house, but this time her house, the one she was standing in. And in the upstairs window of the drawing was a woman. Her, looking out, wide-eyed. Behind her, a shadow. Claire turned, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the message was clear. This wasn't just a story about the past. It was happening now. She was part of it. And if she didn't uncover what the Red Threshold really was and how she was tied to it, then she wouldn't just lose the children she was trying to save. She'd lose herself. Claire didn't know what to expect when she finally reached out to Marcus, the one name she'd been avoiding ever since this began. A retired child psychologist who had worked at state homes and group centers back in the late 90s, Marcus was known for being controversial. His approach was unconventional, his sessions often unrecorded, and several kids under his care had reportedly been rehomed after sudden personality shifts. Claire had stumbled upon his name in the margins of one of the defunct therapy camp's archived rosters, faint, almost erased. At first, she thought it was a clerical error, a coincidental match. But when she matched the handwriting in Eli's drawing, the odd spiral at the end of his R's, to notes from one of Marcus's old case reports, her stomach dropped. It was the same. She knew he had answers. She just didn't expect him to be waiting for her. His house sat on a remote lot just outside town, buried in a thicket of pines, the kind of place people didn't find by accident. Claire parked in the gravel path and stepped out into dead silence, her nerves fraying like wires sparking under pressure. Marcus opened the door before she could knock, like he'd been watching her approach. His expression was calm, almost relieved. "Took you long enough," he said, as if greeting an old friend. Claire hesitated, suddenly unsure of her entire plan, but followed him inside. The air was thick with incense, books stacked like barricades in every corner, folders yellowed from decades of dust. And then he said it just like that, like it was no secret at all. "You were one of them, you know.
Not just a witness.
You were part of the experiment." It took a full minute for Claire to process what he'd said. He explained that the red threshold was never just about therapy. It was a pilot program, government-adjacent, loosely shielded under the guise of trauma recovery. But its real purpose was testing the manipulation of childhood memory, rewriting the way children processed fear and attachment by using false environments and scripted routines. Children were shown photos of places that didn't exist, encouraged to draw them, then praised for remembering things that had never happened. Over time, some of them stopped distinguishing imagination from memory altogether. But one test group, Claire's group, responded differently. Instead of absorbing the program, they began pulling details from somewhere else, details the researchers didn't plant. The house with the red door wasn't part of the experiment. None of the staff recognized it. But the kids kept drawing it anyway, over and over. Every child in Claire's group drew that house, including her. That's when the experiment changed. The focus shifted to her. They started isolating her, showing her subliminal messages during sleep cycles, feeding her narratives that contradicted her own memories. Marcus was there the entire time. He had watched it unfold, and eventually he backed out, quietly, before the program was dismantled and scrubbed from the state's records. "You forgot because they made you forget," he said. "But now it's coming back. That's why the boy paints the house. You triggered it. You're the anchor." Claire's breath caught in her chest. The kids weren't painting the house because they remembered it. They were remembering her. She wasn't just a social worker randomly assigned to this case. She was the key that reawakened their connection to something buried. Her name wasn't a coincidence in the folder. It was intentional. Someone had placed her there to finish what had started. And then Marcus gave her the final blow. He told her the house was real.
Or at least it had been.
In 1999, just before the therapy camp was shut down, a cabin matching the children's drawings was found in a restricted forest reserve. Inside, investigators found murals painted on the walls, crude but haunting, identical to the sketches made by the kids. The structure was destroyed in a fire shortly after, ruled an accident. But Marcus said he always suspected someone burned it to erase what was inside. "That house," he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time, "wasn't where the kids were taken. It was where they were made to believe they had been." The real twist? The experiment didn't implant a house. It extracted one, pulled it from somewhere deeper, from the children's shared unconscious, or something darker. Before Claire could press further, Marcus rose. His face paled, eyes darting to the window. "They're here," he whispered. "I told you too much." The lights in the house flickered. A car door slammed outside. Claire rushed to the window but saw nothing, just trees swaying, shadows dancing unnaturally across the yard. Marcus turned to her and shoved a flash drive into her hand. "Everything's on here. Videos. Test logs. They'll erase me next, but not if you show this to someone." Claire backed away, unsure whether to believe him, unsure whether this was another layer of deception. But as she ran to her car and peeled out of the driveway, adrenaline pumping, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Marcus standing in the doorway, arms raised, surrendering to someone she couldn't see. By the time she made it back to town and loaded the flash drive, the files were already corrupted. All but one. A single image. A scan of a drawing. Not of the house. Not of the camp. But of Claire, standing with a group of 5 children. All of them staring at the camera, blink-eyed, their shirts marked with the same triangle and circle symbol. And in the background, behind them, was the red door. Suddenly, everything she thought she knew about her life, her career, and her memories fractured in an instant. She wasn't trying to solve someone else's mystery. She was the mystery. Claire couldn't sleep that night. The static hum of the corrupted flash drive haunted her, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw those children, expressionless, posed like dolls, with that same symbol glowing faintly on their shirts like a forgotten brand. The worst part? She knew their names. The moment she saw their faces, something inside her cracked open, like a door long nailed shut was suddenly flung wide. She whispered them out loud, almost involuntarily. She hadn't said those names in decades, not since the camp. And that meant Marcus had been telling the truth. She hadn't just stumbled into this case. She had been guided, placed, and reactivated like a dormant piece of something larger. And now that it was awake, it wasn't going back to sleep. The next morning, Claire drove to see the only person left from her childhood who might remember something, her mother. She hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years, not since a brutal fight about Claire's decision to go into social work instead of finishing law school. Their relationship had always been brittle, but now it felt like there were deeper reasons she couldn't explain. Her mother lived in a modest, aging home on the outskirts of town, the kind with faded yellow shutters and rose bushes that had grown wild. Claire hesitated before knocking. When her mother opened the door, she looked startled, like Claire was someone she hadn't expected to see again. They sat in silence for a while, until Claire pulled out the printed photo from the flash drive, the one of the children and herself. She slid it across the table. Her mother's face went white. Not surprised, terrified. She tried to deny it at first, to play dumb, but Claire pressed harder. Her voice shook as she demanded answers, begged for the truth. That's when her mother dropped the facade and whispered the words Claire would never forget. You weren't supposed to survive. According to her mother, there had been a deal, some government-backed study, promising accelerated trauma recovery, one that paid desperate families hush money in exchange for their participation. Claire had been struggling after her father's death, and the state offered placement at a therapeutic retreat that promised breakthrough memory realignment. Her mother was told it was safe, supervised, monitored by trained specialists. But a few weeks into the program, something changed. The staff stopped answering calls. The updates grew vague. And then one day, a man showed up at their home. No badge, no name, and handed her a folder. Inside were Claire's discharge papers, a note thanking them for participation, and a non-disclosure agreement already signed in her name. Claire returned home quiet, compliant, and seemingly cured. She had no memory of what happened at the retreat. And her mother never asked. They warned me not to, she said. They said if I did, I'd lose more than just a daughter. Claire was shaking. Her whole life had been a cover story, a patchwork of half-truths designed to keep her from looking backward. And now, because she had, everything was unraveling. But before she could process it, her mother made a final confession. Someone had visited her just days before. A woman claiming to be a therapist conducting a follow-up study on long-term outcomes. She had asked about Claire's recent behavior, whether she was experiencing dreams, memories, signs of reversion. Her mother didn't give much away, but the woman left a warning. Tell her to stop digging, or we'll do what we should have done 20 years ago. Claire felt like the ground had vanished beneath her. The threat wasn't just real, it was already closing in. That night, she returned to her apartment and found it had been ransacked. Not trashed. Searched. Carefully. Files gone. Laptop stripped of its hard drive. Even the sketchbook with Eli's drawings was missing. Whoever did it wanted information, and they wanted to send a message. We're watching you. But the scariest part wasn't what they took, it was what they left behind. On her kitchen table was a single sheet of paper. A photocopy of the same group photo, from the flash drive. But this one was marked in red ink, circles around each child's face, with one face X'd out. Hers. She didn't sleep that night, her thoughts looping in a cycle of panic, guilt, and the gnawing feeling of inevitability. Every shadow felt alive. Every silence too loud. The next day she was given a choice. A voicemail from an unlisted number. Calm, composed, unmistakably real. Stop now. We'll make sure the boy and his family disappear. They'll get new names, new lives. You'll never see them again, but they'll be safe. Or you keep pushing, and everyone connected to this, everyone you care about, vanishes for real. Your call. It wasn't just an ultimatum. It was a psychological trap. She had spent her entire life helping vulnerable kids, fighting for them, protecting them, and now she was being asked to choose between exposing the truth and destroying the people she swore to defend. And deep down, she knew they weren't bluffing. She stood at the edge of something massive, her hands shaking, her mind unraveling. Every instinct told her to run, to take the deal, to vanish into some quiet, anonymous corner of the world. But the faces of the children haunted her. The drawings. The dreams. Eli. And then she noticed something. On the back of the photocopy they had left in her apartment, there was a faint watermark. Hard to read, almost invisible. But under a flashlight, it revealed a name she hadn't seen in over 20 years. A name that changed everything. Not of a person, of a place. The house with the red door had a real name. And it was still listed on a long-forgotten government registry. She wasn't done digging. Not even close. But now she had to ask herself one terrifying question. What if she was the reason all of this started? Claire drove for hours. The address linked to the house with the red door was buried deep in an old land registry system used by defunct government agencies, and it didn't even appear on modern maps. Her GPS failed halfway there. The roads narrowed, twisted, and finally disappeared into dirt paths barely wide enough for one car. Trees swallowed the light, their gnarled branches reaching like claws, and every mile deeper into the woods felt like a descent into something ancient and forbidden. But her gut told her this was it. This was where it all began, whatever it really was. She parked the car and stepped out into silence, so thick it rang in her ears. The air was dense with damp earth, pine, and something else. Faint, metallic, unnatural. The house stood just beyond a ridge, hidden behind overgrown brush and a rusting wire fence. It looked almost abandoned at first glance. Chipped paint, boarded windows, a slanted porch that groaned with the wind. But as she crept closer, she saw a single security camera swivel toward her. Not old, new. And it was on. Someone had been here recently. Inside, the house was pristine, clean floors, modern wiring, surveillance monitors, sterile white lights overhead. This wasn't just a house. It was a controlled environment, a forgotten facility that had been reactivated. In one room, she found rows of label files. Dozens, hundreds of children. Each one with coded identifiers, psychological notes, behavioral reports, and symbols that matched the ones from the children's shirts in the photo. It wasn't just about her. This was a full-scale behavioral experiment run under a project called Substrata. And she wasn't its only subject, just one of the earliest. Then came the sound, footsteps behind her. Claire turned fast, heart slamming, only to see someone she never expected. Detective Harris. The same man who had helped her decode the initial drawings, who had warned her about being followed. But now he looked different. Sharper. Colder. His badge wasn't on his hip anymore. He wasn't even pretending. He told her she should have taken the deal. That everything up until now was carefully curated to push her exactly where they wanted. Every message. Every photo. Even Marcus. Marcus, the boy she thought had started the chain of events with his eerie sketches. He wasn't random. He was a control subject, placed in her care because the organization knew she couldn't resist a broken child who mirrored her own past. Claire's rage boiled over. She demanded answers, threatened to expose everything. But Harris wasn't fazed. "Expose it to who?" he said calmly. "We run the agencies. We fund the shelters. We write the evaluations you file." Substrata wasn't just a program, it was a protocol. We identify children with fragmented trauma memories, isolate them, and study how their minds rebuild under false inputs. You weren't just a survivor, Claire. You were a prototype. She backed away, but behind her came more footsteps. A woman stepped forward, well-dressed, confident, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Claire recognized her instantly. Her supervisor. The one who had assigned Eli's case, who insisted she handle it personally, even though Claire had asked to be transferred. She'd been playing both sides all along. She told Claire it didn't have to end this way, that they had learned so much from her, that she was living proof the program worked. "You're not the hero here," she said gently. "You're the outcome." Claire's mind reeled. Every memory felt unreliable. Every connection was suspect. Eli wasn't a fluke, he was the next wave. A second generation of program trauma, designed to test how deeply fabricated memories could anchor behavior. And now that Claire was remembering the truth, she had become a liability. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to erase. In a flash of panic, Claire bolted. She smashed the monitors, broke the power box, and ran into the forest as alarms blared behind her. She didn't know if she was being followed, only that if she didn't get out now, she never would. Branches tore at her clothes, her lungs burned, and somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard Marcus's voice calling her name. Or maybe it was in her head. Maybe it always had been. Eventually, she found her car, gunned the engine, and sped toward the highway. She didn't stop driving for 3 hours. Not until her phone lit up with a single message from an encrypted number. It read, "You weren't supposed to find it. But now that you have, we have to finish what we started." The screen flickered, and a live feed popped up. Eli, alive, but scared, sitting in a room Claire didn't recognize. A countdown blinked in the corner. She had 24 hours to surrender, or watch everything she'd fought for vanish. And still, she didn't know the worst of it. She wasn't the only one watching that feed.
Claire didn't sleep. She didn't rest.
Her mind was a storm of voices, broken timelines, and images she couldn't trust anymore. But if there was one thing left inside her that hadn't been rewritten, it was the fire. The raw, unfiltered instinct that told her none of this, none of what they built, controlled, manipulated, could be allowed to continue. Not for Eli. Not for the other children. And not for the person she used to be before they turned her into a vessel for their research. As the countdown on the encrypted live feed dropped into single digits, Claire knew she couldn't wait for the next move. She had to strike first. She tracked the signal from the feed. Eli wasn't in a remote compound or a lab like she feared. He was in a place she once thought of as safe. The Regional Child Welfare Center. The very building where she had spent years trying to protect vulnerable kids. They had turned it into a testing site right under her nose. Her badge still worked. The security guards recognized her. No one questioned a panicked social worker showing up in the middle of the night. At least, not until she crossed into the restricted wing, swiped the stolen card from Harris's unconscious body, and saw the inside of Substrata's command hub with her own eyes. Dozens of terminals. Files projected onto glass walls. Eli, sitting alone in a soundproof chamber under white light, staring at the mirror in front of him like it was speaking to him. Claire's breath hitched. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked resigned. That terrified her more than anything else. Then the voice came over the intercom.
It was her supervisor. "Come."
Almost maternal. "You shouldn't have come, Claire. This was your chance to heal. To be part of something revolutionary. You're ruining everything." Claire demanded Eli's release, threatened to expose them all, told them she had evidence. Names, locations, timestamps. But the woman just smiled, stepping into view behind the glass like it was a stage. "You think this is about evidence? We control what becomes real. And you're not here to rescue anyone. You're here to prove how far we can push you before you break." Suddenly, the monitors lit up. Claire's face. Her case files. Notes from psychiatric evaluations she never wrote. Recordings of conversations she never had. They were rewriting her life in real time, scripting her final moments. It wasn't just about manipulating memories anymore, it was about manufacturing narratives. Her own story was being erased and replaced as she stood there watching. In a last-ditch move, Claire turned and pulled the fire alarm, knowing full well it wouldn't trigger a building evacuation, but it did what she hoped. For a split second, it disrupted the system's power surge. The glass chamber flickered, unlocked, and Claire rushed in, grabbing Eli and holding him close. He was dazed, but aware enough to whisper, "I drew that house again." But this time, they were inside it. With Eli in her arms, she bolted for the emergency exit, but Harris was waiting, gun drawn.
Steady.
"I told you it would come to this," he said. "You're not saving him. You're corrupting the data." Claire pleaded with him, begged him to remember why he joined this work in the first place. But something cracked in his eyes. Not doubt. Recognition. "They're watching me too," he said quietly. "They always were." And then, without another word, he turned the gun on the wall of servers and pulled the trigger. Chaos exploded. Sparks. Alarms. Emergency lights bathed the halls in crimson. Claire didn't look back. She ran. Through the corridor, down the stairwell, out into the cold, wet night with Eli clinging to her like he knew this was the only way out. They didn't stop until they were miles away. Until the signal was lost. Until silence returned. In the days that followed, she went dark. Took Eli to a safe location, an old farmhouse she knew from her childhood that no one else remembered. She wrote everything down. Every name. Every memory. Every image Marcus ever drew. She hid the files in a locked flash drive taped behind a broken light switch. Then she waited.
And watched.
Hoping no one else would come. But just as she began to think maybe they had finally won, the twist came. Eli, now more lucid, approached her one morning. "I drew something new," he said quietly, holding out a sheet of paper. It wasn't the house. It wasn't any of the children. It was a drawing of her. Claire, sitting in the farmhouse, looking over her shoulder. And behind her, in the window, was a face she didn't recognize, smiling. "You said we're safe," Eli whispered. "But he said you forgot something. He said it's not over." Claire turned to the window and saw nothing. But by then, she knew better. The final twist wasn't that she had been watched. It was that she had never stopped being part of the experiment. Months passed, though it never truly felt like time moved the same after everything Claire had been through. The leaves outside the farmhouse shifted from green to gold, whispering the changes of season, but inside her world, things remained suspended between silence and survival. She and Eli lived quietly, off-grid, disconnected from everything they once knew. No phones. No social media. No headlines. Just books, board games, and long walks through the woods where no one asked questions. In many ways, it was healing. Eli slowly began to show glimpses of the boy he might have been if none of this had ever happened, if no one had mined his memories for data or turned his pain into an experiment. He laughed more. He slept better. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they stopped driving him to wake up screaming in the middle of the night. For Claire, however, peace was something more elusive, something she had to construct, piece by piece, like a puzzle missing the final edge. In the background, Claire tracked the fallout in quiet ways. Files began leaking on dark web forums. Threads appeared on Reddit under burner accounts detailing coded experiments linked to child development labs and black-budget projects funded by defunct arms of old intelligence agencies. No names were ever mentioned, but the stories matched too closely to be coincidence. Similar houses, similar drawings, children reporting dreams they couldn't explain. One anonymous user claimed they found one of Marcus's sketches in a dusty archive room in Nevada, even though Marcus had never been there. It felt like the evidence was spreading in whispers, like the truth was fighting to breathe even if no one ever fully spoke it aloud. Claire didn't respond to any of the posts. She just read, watched, and kept Eli close. But answers did come. Quiet ones, filtered through old connections and people she still trusted. She learned that Detective Harris was never found after the explosion in the facility. No body. No trace. As if he had disappeared with the data he destroyed. Her former supervisor resigned weeks later, citing health reasons, but never appeared in public again. Some whispered she had gone underground. Others believed she had been silenced by the very machine she once helped build. Most people in child welfare didn't speak of the incident at all. Too many wanted to pretend it never happened, afraid of what it would mean if it were true. And for those outside the system, it all sounded too unbelievable to care. Just another conspiracy in a sea of trending topics and viral content designed to erase attention spans. Claire did what she could. She sent encrypted flash drives to 3 different journalists, people she had vetted, people who wouldn't just bury the story if it got uncomfortable. One of them responded only once. A short message. "We believe you. Working on it. Stay safe." After that, silence. But a few weeks later, a documentary trailer surfaced on YouTube. It was cryptic. Just images of children's drawings, the outline of a house with a red door, and the words, "Memory is not truth." Premiering soon. It trended for a few days, pulling in millions of views. Then it was gone. Pulled offline without warning. Copyright claim. Digital removal. All that remained was the thumbnail, and even that began to vanish from search results. Claire knew then that she hadn't just stumbled into something corrupt. She had survived a machine built to erase the evidence of itself. A living organism made from policy, money, and quiet men in polished suits who never had to get their hands dirty. And yet, despite everything, despite how deeply they had embedded themselves into every layer of power, they hadn't won. Because Eli was still free. She was still breathing. And somewhere, the truth was still echoing in dark corners, refusing to die. One night, just before winter settled in for good, Claire found Eli standing at the edge of the woods, staring at the sky. He handed her a new drawing, different from the others. No house. No children. Just a bright, clear field with 2 figures walking away from something that burned behind them. It was peaceful.
Clean.
A place untouched by the shadows that had followed them for so long. She asked him if it was something he saw in a dream. He shook his head. "No," he said softly. "It's where we're going." Claire looked at the drawing for a long time before folding it and slipping it into her jacket. She didn't know what the future held. Maybe they'd have to run again. Maybe the Watchers would return. But in that moment, with Eli beside her and the stars above her, she realized she didn't need to know everything. Sometimes surviving was the only answer you needed. And yet, just before they turned back toward the house, a strange glow lit up in the distance, brief, silent, almost like a camera flash from the woods. Claire froze. It was gone as quickly as it came. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe someone had just found them again. But this time, she didn't feel fear. She felt ready. Because she wasn't just a subject anymore. She was the one writing the ending.